Well, this is Dr. Mark Hitchcock here at my office at Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. And I want to thank you for joining us for another episode of Marking the Times. These are interesting times in which we live. Certainly we all see that with all the unrest that's taking place and with upcoming elections and a lot of things happening in the world we've been talking about with this, peace treaty between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and possibly some other dominoes falling in those areas. So a lot of things happening, but I want to answer a question today that's sent in. We've talked a lot about the Olivet Discourse, which is Jesus' great sermon about the end times. It's found in Matthew 24. It's found in Mark 13 and Luke 21. We've talked about that quite a bit, and so since we've talked about that a bit, it raises questions. And I received this question, and the questioner begins by pointing out that my view has been that Matthew 24 is talking about the events of the tribulation period leading up to the second coming of Jesus. And so I believe the rapture has already taken place. And so starting out here then, kind of in the middle of the questioner says this: in the passage, Jesus was talking to the disciples, also us as a Christian. So you is referring to us. However, in verse 15, for instance, it says, "For when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, let the reader understand." Jesus was talking about the Antichrist, but by that time we should have been raptured. If that's the case, we won't be seeing the Antichrist declaring himself as God in the temple. So is you referring to us Christians or non-believers? I'm confused. The big issue with the Olivet Discourse is timing. And really that's true of all of prophecy. When you think about the issues related to the rapture, is it pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib? The issue with the millennium, is it today or is it future? Same thing's true of the Olivet Discourse. The big issue is timing. And some people believe the Olivet Discourse is all about the past. It's all about AD 70. They're often called preterists. Some, like myself, believe it's all future. That's called the futurist view. Others believe it's kind of a combination of the two, that it's talking about AD 70 as a foreshadow or a preview of what's going to happen in the end. But the reason I take it futuristically is Jesus mentions labor pains or birth pains. That's commonly associated in the Old Testament and in 1 Thessalonians 5 with the end times. And you don't begin birth pains until shortly before the delivery. So I think that image speaks of the time before Christ's coming. Also in chapter 24, verse 21, Jesus said there'll be great tribulations. This has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever shall. So it's talking about a time of distress unlike anything in history. It's not AD 70, it's the end times. It's the great tribulation. And then down in verse 29, Jesus says, after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon won't give its light, the sign of the Son of Man will appear, the Son of Man's going to come on the clouds in power and great glory. So clearly that's looking to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Well, having said all that, the question here that's being asked is, why then does Jesus in this sermon use the second person? He'll say you when you see this and when you see that. In other words, he seems to be talking about people who are living in his own day. Well, a couple things about that. Again, take your Bible and look this up for yourself later. But right before the Olivet Discourse, back in chapter 23 and verse 35, Jesus is talking to the Pharisees and he says, "But you murdered Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar." Clearly, this Zechariah is referred to back in the book of 2 Chronicles. And of course, he refers to Abel being killed, which is back in the first book of the Bible. So obviously, the people he's speaking to didn't kill Abel and didn't kill Zechariah, but he says, you killed him. In other words, the word you here can be used, the second person can be used of people in the past. And so in the Olivet Discourse, he's using the second person again, but he's referring to people in the future. So when he says, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, he's talking about that future generation of people alive on the earth at that time after the rapture. And I think he uses the second person plural there, or second person, the you, to make it very present and make it personal. Let me just read, as I close out here, let me read what John MacArthur says about this. He says, the whole fulfillment of the Olivet Discourse, therefore, is future. The fact that Jesus spoke in the second person, especially in chapter 24, does not prove he was speaking to the disciples about their own generation. The Old Testament prophets frequently addressed messages to people yet unborn, some of whom would live hundreds of years in the future. God picked up the prophets, as it were, and transported him to the time of which he was to prophesy, and he spoke as if he were standing directly before those future generations. Jesus was in effect saying, "You who are alive at that time." So I like that. Jesus would often take a prophet, if you will, or God would, and move them to the future, and they're kind of speaking to that future generation. So when you read, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, as MacArthur says here, say in your mind, think, you who are alive at that time will see this. So I hope that helps you here, but with the Olivet Discourse, to understand who it is Jesus is speaking to. He's speaking to that future generation alive during the tribulation period, who will see these things. Well, thanks for joining us again for Marking the Times. God bless you. Hope to see you again next time.